Rachel Reeves, welcome to Acting Prime Minister, and thanks so much for coming on the podcast.
It's a pleasure. Lovely to be with you, Paul.
And you've had a very busy week with the lobbying scandal. What does it feel like when you're sort of in that position, leading the charge on a big, breaking, rolling story like that?
Well, in a way, we've been working on this for months now, because when I was appointed to the role as Shadow Cabinet Office Minister last April, we all remember, Paul, when I chaired the Business Select Committee, I did the inquiry into the collapse of Carillion. And part of the Cabinet Office role is to look at government procurement. And because I've done so much of that when I was on the Select Committee, I thought I'd have a look at procurement during the pandemic. And that's when I started discovering some of the, what I would regard as dodgy contracts for PPE, and so much money going to friends and donors of the Conservative Party. So for me, this has been a gradual build-up over the last year. And, you know, we've got some stories out of it and a bit of momentum, but obviously it's picked up pace massively this last couple of weeks because of the Greensill scandal. But as well, Greensill is something that we've been asking parliamentary questions about for some time, but it's all obviously gathered a head of storm recently. And it is a case of staying on top of the story, but also helping move the story along and thinking about new angles and new ways of sort of saying the same thing, but with new evidence to keep the story going in the news. And you know, I think in a way, like the Tories and David Cameron and Rishi Sunak's texts and Matthew Hancock's private drinks have done the sort of job for us, really. But yes, it's been pretty relentless. But the great thing about this is that it's been a real joint effort across the Shadow Cabinet. So you've got Annalisa Dodds and Bridget Phillipson focusing on the coronavirus large business interruption loan scheme stuff and about the access that Greensill got to Treasury ministers, but also officials at the Treasury. There's 10 meetings, of course. And then you've got Jonathan Ashworth, who's been really pushing on the involvement of Matthew Hancock in all of this, not just his drinks with Lex Greensill, but also the 15% shareholding he's got in his sister's firm that was a registered supplier to the NHS. And then you've had Angela Rayner, for example, working with me on some of the issues around ministerial standards. And Keir now, for the last 2 weeks, has gone on this at Prime Minister's Questions. So it's been something that we've really come together and worked on across the team, across the whole of the Shadow Cabinet. I've really enjoyed that as well.
Okay, well, let's imagine for a moment now that you are the Prime Minister being lobbied yourself, because the whole point of this podcast is that we make you Prime Minister. And you know, I'm sure that you would ignore the texts and the emails and the advances. But let's get you settled into number 10. Firstly, what is the personal item that you would take from home with you into Downing Street?
Well, I think that Boris Johnson has done up number 10, so £200,000 refurbishment. So it looks like it's going to be in pretty good nick when I or indeed Keir Starmer arrive. So that's very nice of him and the Tory donors who have done that. So I think I probably don't need any new cushions or anything like that. I get by on lots and lots of cups of Earl Grey tea. So maybe a large packet of Earl Grey tea bags.
And what would your first meal be in Downing Street?
Oh, well, I do like a takeaway curry. So maybe I would. I'm not sure if the Shish Mahal in Kirkstall, Leeds, will deliver to number 10, but they might do if I ask nicely.
What's your regular? What do you like to have?
Well, I like. I could speak about this for the whole half hour. Lamb on the bone with spinach is what I like at the Shish Mahal.
Nice, lovely.
It's lovely.
And who is the first person?
Just down the road from the ITV studio there, actually.
Oh, yeah, which is where I used to work, as you know. So
I know.
I'll have to go there next time I'm up in Leeds. And who's the first person you'd call as Prime Minister?
Well, I think I'll probably phone up my children because they don't know that Labour wins elections. So I think they'd be delighted that there was a Labour person in number 10 Downing Street.
Yeah, because they're too young, aren't they? How old are they?
They are 8 and 5.
Okay, yeah.
So I was born, Paul, in 1979. So the first 18 years of my life, the whole of my childhood, was under Conservative governments, and I'm determined that my children have a Labour government before they turn 18.
Well, let's talk a bit about your path to power now, imagining that you're Prime Minister. So you were born in Lewisham in London, and from a very young age you got involved in politics, joining the Labour Party aged 16. You studied PP at Oxford and then a Master's in Economics at the London School of Economics before joining the Bank of England's graduate scheme. And you worked for the bank for several years, as well as at the British Embassy in Washington and the banking and insurance company HBOS, before then being elected MP in 2010. Where you quickly joined Ed Miliband's shadow team. And after a spell on the backbenches under Jeremy Corbyn, you rejoined the shadow cabinet this year under Keir Starmer to shadow Michael Gove's portfolio in the cabinet office. So let's talk about your early memories of politics. I mean, where did your politics come from, and what's your earliest memory of being interested in politics?
Well, my earliest memory really was aged 8 in the 1987 general election. And at school, a lot of my friends were talking about who their mums and dads were going to be voting for in the forthcoming general election. And I'm ashamed to say, Paul, I had no idea what they were talking about. And so I went home and I asked my dad about the election and who they were voting for, who he was voting for. And he put on the 6 o'clock news and he said, "That's Neil Kinnock and that's who we vote for." Now, I told that story in 2010, not long after I'd been elected as the MP for Leeds West, and my dad texted me. And he said, "It sounds like an unlikely story, Rachel, but it was good." And I said, "In what way unlikely? You did vote for Neil Kinnock, did you?" Suddenly thinking, oh my goodness, my dad is quite a lefty. And he said, "No, it's just, if that's the case, it's the first thing you've ever done anything I've told you to do." But it had quite a big impact, it seemed, on me. And after that, I did become quite interested in politics. And, Thatcher was Prime Minister, and my mum and dad, they were both primary school teachers. My mum was a special needs teacher when I was very young. But because of the cuts, especially for non-classroom based teaching, my mum's job as a special education needs teacher, it basically disappeared. And so she became a classroom teacher. Now, that was fine for her. She was still in work. But it meant that children who needed extra support were no longer getting it. Mm-hmm. And they were in classes of 30 or more because, of course, class sizes are increasing rapidly. And it just seemed to me that people weren't getting a decent start in life. And, then when I was at secondary school, our sixth form was 2 prefab huts in the playground, and they were either freezing cold or boiling hot. There were never enough textbooks to go around, and our library at school was turned into a classroom because there weren't enough classrooms to teach the growing school role. And I felt so strongly that the government that we had in the 80s and 90s, it didn't care at all about communities like the one I grew up in Lewisham, and they didn't care about schools like mine. And I wanted to do something about it, and for me, that something was getting involved in politics to try and change things. And maybe that was maybe unusual for a 16-year-old girl in Lewisham, but for me, that was how I sort of wanted to play my part in making that change. And I got involved. I joined the Labour Party actually 25 years ago this month, and I campaigned then in the 1997 election, and in every single election since then.
And chess apparently is a big influence on your politics too. How does that work?
So at primary school, we had a head teacher for a while who was a really good county chess player, and he got our whole school playing chess. I remember playing in my first chess tournament, age 7 or 8. And it was a chess match between my primary school in Lewisham and another primary school. And there were about 180 players on each school. And I was the youngest, I think, for my school. And I think I was on the second to last board. So, I was a bit of a novice, but I got my pawn to the end of the board, turned it into a queen and checkmate my opponent. And after that, I got the chess bug. And I carried on playing really well into my teens. And competitively at chess tournaments and the like. And I still play a little bit. I've actually got chess into lots of the schools in Leeds West. The division bell is ringing.
That's absolutely fine. And this is real life. You're in your parliamentary office,
Yeah.
division bells going. If you're happy to carry on, you don't need to go and vote, I assume.
Yeah, fine, okay. Just to explain then. I've got chess into a lot of schools in Leeds West. As somebody who I knew when I played chess, set up a charity called Chess in Schools and Communities to get chess to working class kids in poorer communities. And that's something that really mattered to me, because when I played chess, most of the kids had, chess tutors coming into their school. They were fee-paying schools, and I was quite unusual, really, going to my local comp and playing in chess tournaments. And so I thought it was brilliant. This charity was set up that got chess coaching and chess books and chess sets and chess clocks into schools in poorer areas. And we've got some great chess players now at primary schools in Leeds West. And I go around the schools and I keep my sort of my little brain working by playing chess against the 7, 8, 9 and 10-year-olds that I once was.
Okay, so if you had to give your first speech as Prime Minister, given your background in politics and what influenced you at a young age, how, in a couple of sentences really, how would you sort of sum up your politics?
Wanting to make sure that people from all sorts of backgrounds get a decent start in life and the opportunity to fulfil their potential. And I just don't believe under Tory governments that happens. My secondary school got the new school building that we were asking for a year after Labour came to power in 1997. We had waited for years and years for that investment under a Conservative government, and we never got it. And it's the same today. Schools in Leeds West, where I'm an MP now, they were rebuilt under Labour, and that investment, it just stopped in the last 10 years. And it is tragic because it wastes so much opportunity and potential.
The bell has finally stopped ringing now as well. Well done for continuing and persevering. And as soon as you were elected an MP, you were tipped for the top. I remember reading articles about you and how you were a rising star in the Labour Party. What did that feel like, though, as a new MP? Was there sort of quite a lot of weight of expectation on your shoulders that you feel that you sort of had to fulfil that expectation?
I think my first 5 years as an MP, really, Paul, were a bit of a whirlwind. As you say, I was promoted within 6 months to be Shadow Pensions Minister. A year after that, I was Shadow Chief Secretary to the Treasury. And a couple of years after that, I was Shadow Work and Pensions Secretary. And, with hindsight, you do think about these things. But at the time, I'm not sure I really did, because I was just on this escalator or whirlwind or whatever you want to call it. And I thought that we would win in 2015 and I would be a government minister. And I threw everything into achieving that. I toured the country going to marginal seats. Every week I was at the dispatch box. I was making speeches. I was doing policy announcements. I worked so hard to achieve that Labour government. And it was exhausting, but it was exhilarating as well. And at the time, I don't think I thought so much about what expectation was on me, or that it was somehow unusual to be in the position that I was. But looking back, I obviously recognise that it was.
And then it must have been quite tough because, obviously you were disappointed by the 2015 election result when David Cameron was returned with a majority, but also you had the sort of the double whammy of then Jeremy Corbyn taking up the leadership and returning to the backbenches, which must have been quite a big adjustment, having been on the front bench in the thick of it, and then to return to the backbenches, which is no bad thing, and there's lots of good work that goes on the backbenches, but it's very different, isn't it? Was it quite a difficult adjustment for you?
In 2015, I think I was the last one to realise that Labour wasn't going to win the election, and right up until that exit poll, I thought we had a really, really good chance, and it was crushing, really. And I went to bed actually at about 10:10, and I woke up and I turned the TV on when I saw that Nuneaton had returned another Conservative MP with a big majority. I turned the TV back off and went back to sleep and woke up to go to my count at about 5 o'clock in the morning. I was also 8 months pregnant at the time, so So I then had to make a decision, really, in September that year, of whether I wanted to throw myself back into frontbench politics or to do something different. And I didn't vote for Jeremy to be leader, and I thought, well, actually this is a chance to find my feet really. And to maybe work at a different pace. And so I took the opportunity to not come back straight away from maternity leave in September, but to have a bit more time off and then return to the backbenches. And I'm somebody who believes in using your time well, and so I decided I was going to use my time on the backbenches to pursue things that I really cared about. And so I did a number of things. I went on the Treasury Select Committee, and then I started chairing the BEIS, the Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy Select Committee, where I really, the Carillion thing was in a way sort of transformative for me, because it gave me a cause, and it gave me an opportunity to use, I think, what I'm good at, which is, analytical, understanding the numbers, following the money. And I got really stuck into that. I also wrote a couple of books about women in politics, about Alice Bacon, who was the first female MP in Leeds and the only woman to have represented any of the Leeds constituencies until I was elected in 2010. And then for the centenary of the first woman taking her seat in Parliament, I wrote a history of women in Parliament. And then after my friend and colleague Jo Cox died, I co-chaired the Jo Cox Commission on Loneliness. So I feel like I wanted to sort of find my feet and work at a different pace on the backbenches, but I ended up working at a pretty intense pace on the backbenches as well. And particularly my work on the collapse of Carillion, I think has put me in good stead for the work that I'm doing now on the front bench again.
And now you are back on the front bench. Does the party feel different to you under Keir Starmer to the way it felt under Jeremy Corbyn?
Well, look, I mean, under Jeremy, I was on the back benches, and so it was quite a different experience. But yes, look, the Labour Party is under new leadership under Keir Starmer. He's brought in a whole new different team, and I think that our focus is different. Our focus is now on rebuilding our relationship with people who have voted Labour in the past but have turned away from us, not just in the last 2 elections, but the last 4 or so elections. And we're focusing on winning and rebuilding those links with working class communities who we were formed to serve and represent.
Why then, and this is the difficult question, but why do you think Labour is still 14 points behind, according to some polls? What's not working at the moment, or what still needs to be improved?
I don't think we should forget how far Labour has come in the last year and a bit. In December 2019, it was our worst election defeats since 1935. We lost seats that we had always held. So, and when Keir became leader of the Labour Party, we were more than 20 points behind in the polls. So, yes, there is still a gap between us and the Tories, but that gap has narrowed considerably under Keir's leadership. Look, at the moment, if there was a general election tomorrow, Labour wouldn't get a majority. There is still work to do to turn around our fortunes as a party and to reconnect with those voters who once put a cross next to us, but haven't now, in some cases for many years. And that is work in progress, but it's work that we are turning around this tanker and we are moving in the right direction. And, I've been knocking on doors a lot recently, and, I love campaigning, and campaigned, as I said before, in every election, local, national, whatever, by-election since 1997. And I've been campaigning in Hartlepool, in my own city of Leeds, and earlier this week I've been in Cardiff and also in Essex. And what I would say is that Labour are back in the game. People are not saying, no, never, I'm not voting Labour, or you must be joking. And I got an awful lot of that in 2019. What they're saying is, yeah, I haven't made up my mind yet. I have voted Labour in the past, often all of their lives. But at the last election or the election before that, they started voting the Conservative Party. And they're taking another look at us. And we are in consideration, we're in the game.
I think
doesn't mean that they're going to necessarily put their cross next to us this time, but they would think about it. And that is big progress. And we've got another 2 or 3 years to seal the deal.
I think the big question that a lot of people are asking, though, is what does Labour stand for now? Because under Jeremy Corbyn, it was quite clear, and that might not necessarily have been an election winner, but you could kind of put Jeremy Corbyn into a category. You understood his politics, and his policies were often quite eye-catching too. And, I expect you'll say, we're still 3 years out from an election and the policies still need to be devised. But it's harder now, isn't it, to sort of say what Labour stands for? What is Keir Starmer about?
Well, look, Keir tells the story of his politics and where his politics come from. His dad was a toolmaker, his mum was a nurse and suffered ill health, and that's had a big impact on his politics and what he stands for. There's the bell again.
There's the bell. Are you sure you shouldn't be voting?
Well, no, one of the good things at the moment is that we can hand our vote over to a proxy who votes on our behalf, because they don't want the division lobbies full of MPs. So we now get text messages saying vote now, vote imminent, vote immediately. But that's all delegated to Mark Tommy.
Excellent. Well, look, before the bell's out, tell me what Labour stands for then in these days under Keir Starmer. What is the party's ethos?
So I think, first and foremost, Labour are the party of ordinary working people and working families who have not had a good deal from the Tories these last 10 years. Whether you're on a 0 hours contract or you're self-employed, because that's the only work that's available, but have been excluded from support from the Tories this last year, or if you rely on public services or work in public services and are a nurse and have had your pay cut, or a soldier who is risking losing their jobs because of cuts to the armed forces, or somebody waiting for now months, if not years, for a hospital operation. We have for strong public services, but also for security at work and strong, vibrant communities. And our communities and our town centres and our high streets have been hollowed out this last 10 years because of austerity, but also because the Tories, I think, neglect the things that matter to most of us in our everyday lives.
OK, so that's sort of Keir Starmer's pitch to be Prime Minister, but let's get back to your pitch to be Prime Minister as well. And of course, as Prime Minister, not everything will be in your control. Every Prime Minister has great ambitions about what they'd like to do, but then events, those pesky things called events, get in the way. And at the moment, the big event that is blighting the government is this lobbying scandal, as you've been talking about already on the podcast. I just wonder, though, all governing parties end up sort of being accused of cronyism to some degree. And for Labour, I appreciate it's a good chance for you to sort of stick the boot in a bit, but is it not just a bit depressing generally that politics is back in the gutter like this? And do you wonder whether this is just lowering the tone of politics and destroying trust amongst the public, even though it might be a good way to score some party political points?
I think that this does undermine trust in our democracy and actually the very ethos of public service. And that's why it's so important that we root out this sleaze and cronyism at the heart of our politics that's now engulfing the government, which is why last week in Parliament we called for a proper independent inquiry. What the Prime Minister has announced with this inquiry by Nigel Boardman, it's not independent and it's barely an inquiry, because you've got somebody who's a very good friend of the Conservative Party, who has been asked to look in a very narrow remit, just at Greensill, not making recommendations for policy. It really is a joke. And I care about standards in politics, and I care about trust in democracy, and I care passionately about public service. I think I get that from my mum and dad and the jobs that they do. And it angers me that the Conservatives are taking politics back into the gutter. And I said about when I joined the Labour Party 25 years ago. Of course, that was a time when sleaze was also dominating the news. You remember cash for questions and the brown envelopes being handed to Tory MPs for asking questions in Parliament. And today, Tory sleaze is back, and I would argue it's bigger than ever, because back in the 1990s, it was primarily Conservative backbenchers who were involved in the scandal. This time, it goes to the very heart of government, because for everybody lobbying, it takes two to tango. For everybody lobbying, you've got somebody with power today on the inside who's being lobbied and being a willing participant in all of that. And that's what you've got. with Rishi Sunak pushing the Treasury to change the rules on a lending scheme so that Greensill could access it. That's what you've got with Matthew Hancock having private drinks with Lex Greensill, and then the former Prime Minister David Cameron following up and getting access for Greensill to NHS workers' data. And now it's actually to the heart of number 10, with Boris Johnson doing a deal for James Dyson and promising him that the tax status of people working for Dyson would all be fixed because he was First Lord of the Treasury. So this time the sleaze goes right to the heart of number 10 in a way that actually it didn't in the 1990s, because although John Major was affected by it, he wasn't up to his eyes in it in a way that the current raft of ministers in the Conservative Party are.
But it's often a problem for every government. And, Tony Blair was accused of being too close for business to business himself. And actually today he said there's nothing wrong with lobbying. He says it's become a loaded term and the British system is pretty clean in his words. Do you disagree with him then? Because here's a man who was Prime Minister and he thinks there's nothing wrong with lobbying.
Well, what he said today is that, he didn't have a mobile phone and he's very pleased that he didn't. But it's the way that current Tory ministers are responding to the lobbying that is the problem. If things were out in the open and we knew who was meeting with whom and what the outcomes of those meetings were, then I think we would all be a bit more relaxed about this. But it's because it's all done behind closed doors, and it's because it seems to be one rule for those at the top of the Conservative Party and another for everybody else. So if you were one of the 3 million people who were excluded from financial support during this pandemic because of your employment status, you probably wished you'd have had the telephone number of Rishi Sunak or Boris Johnson, because it seems with, a click of the button, they could sort it. But they didn't have the telephone number of the Prime Minister or the Chancellor. And as a result, they've been on their knees in many cases for the last year. If you're one of the nurses who's going to get a real terms pay cut next year, you probably wish you had the telephone number of the Prime Minister or the Chancellor, and maybe you'd get the pay rise that you deserve, but you don't have their numbers. And as a result, you're going to see yourself poorer next year than you are this year, despite everything that you've done for the country. And I do find it staggering that James Dyson was texting the Prime Minister at the height of the pandemic about tax issues rather than working to do everything he could to get things moving. And similarly, with the Prime Minister and the Chancellor, looking after their friends and their donors rather than thinking about the national interest.
OK, well, look, I'm sure the government would have its own response to all of that. But let's do a quick fire round to finish off this podcast. Firstly, who would you rather have dinner with, Joe Biden or Angela Merkel?
Joe Biden.
Yeah? Just because your politics are more similar, or...?
Because I have a huge admiration for Joe Biden, and he has got, 50 years experience in politics, but also he is just one from the centre left. And we don't have much of that at the moment. So I think there's lots of lessons that Labour can learn from him. And also what he's been doing since he became president shows how important it is to be in government, because everything that I've argued for and believe in, we haven't been able to put it into practice these last 11 years, because all of my years as an MP, 11 so far, have been in opposition. Joe Biden has the privilege of being in charge, and you can see the difference that is making.
There goes the bell again. There's a lot of voting going on today in Parliament.
Where would you?
When you're not busy, where would you go on holiday as Prime Minister?
Well, I'd like to carry on doing what I do now, and this summer I'll be going to Devon with my husband and my 2 kids, and then hopefully, if we're allowed, up to Northumberland to stay with family. Lovely.
What song would you dance to at party conference?
I love Beyonce. Which one? And now I can only think of the one that I danced to at my wedding, which was Crazy in Love.
Excellent. I hope you let some journalists into the room for that one.
No, actually, Paul.
And what would your Downing Street pet be?
maybe a goldfish.
Oh, that's lame. Come on. You can do better than a goldfish. You're the Prime Minister. You can't be seen to carry a goldfish bowl under your arm.
I'm not really, maybe this is like going to sort of like ruin me. I'm not really an animal person, Paul. So
that's okay. That's allowed.
Goldfish sort of out of sight, out of mind. Yeah.
There's room for every
Just
type
feed it.
There's room for even goldfish lovers in politics. And lastly, we ask everyone this, would you ever want to be Prime Minister?
No, I wouldn't. And to be honest, when you said to do this podcast, and I love you, Paul, and so I said yes without knowing what the title of it was actually. And when I learned it, I thought, oh my goodness, that's like the last thing I'd want to do. But I want a Labour government, and I want to be a minister in a Labour government. And as I said, 11 years in opposition, and I've made a difference to my constituents. I've achieved things for them, but at a national level and the profound changes that I want to see, you can only do those in government. And, that is what I want more than anything, to see the return of a Labour government, to make the changes that I want to see in this country, to have a country that actually works for ordinary people, where we invest in our public services, ensure people have security at work. And, and I will work my socks off to make that happen.
Well, we watch with interest what happens at the next election. Rachel Reeves, thanks so much for coming on the podcast. It's been a pleasure to talk to you.
And you, Paul.